just like the Southern Baptist Convention. No, we picked 217. Gina.
Tell us the number so we can decide.
217. This is a real Southern Baptist hymn. Would you agree? Okay. There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing its word. It sounds as music in my ear, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells me of a Savior's love who died to set me free. It tells me of his precious blood, the sinner's perfect plea. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells me what my Father has in store for every day. And though I tread a darksome path, he'll sunshine all the way. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells of one whose loving heart can feel my deepest woe, who in each sorrow bears a part that none can bear below. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me.
All right. I know that I had indicated we would start something new and consistent. I hope you're not upset. I certainly hope that this will not be a series. I do want to talk tonight. Oh, wait. All right. Hold on. Some things don't change. All right. I do want to talk tonight a little bit about where I was last Wednesday, which is the Southern Baptist Convention. And there's a sense in which you might go, who cares about the Southern Baptist Convention? Well, you should care at least a little bit, because our church cooperates with the Southern Baptist Convention. And so just to put a dollar amount on that, to the tune of, we have treasurer and finance people here, but the cooperative program to the tune of about $40,000 a year. Does that sound about right? A little bit under that last year, I think. So that's a substantial commitment that we have, and so that's why you guys send me to go and try and figure out what's going on every year, and you should be at least a little bit interested in what is going on. So I do want to actually get into the Word as well, but I've got a few things that I think will be helpful for you to think through, some things that you might see in the news, because it's always in the news. It's usually not very flattering. And so I want to just take a little bit of time to talk about that tonight. How many of you grew up in a Southern Baptist church? Okay? All right. Very cool. How many, I won't ask this, how many of you knew that we're a Southern Baptist church? You may not have known that, right? So, yeah, how many of you are like, just another thing. Southern Baptist Convention is a big group of churches, we think. It's actually one of the things that I have learned is that it's a little bit harder to count Southern Baptist churches than you think because of the nature of the connections that we share. But the number that's usually thrown around is somewhere in the high 40,000s. So at least a few years ago, there were still more Southern Baptist churches than McDonald's in America. So, all right, there you go. You got McDonald's beef. That's a lot of churches, right? So very, very big group. And what I want to start with, maybe, is just to show you a little bit of how the convention works. The Southern Baptist Convention exists for only 2 days a year. Actually really important to understand. People get really frustrated. Why don't Southern Baptists do this? Why isn't the denomination doing this? Because the denomination is not actually a really traditional kind of denomination. So a lot of denominations, there's a hierarchy, there is a presbytery, there is a synod, there's a bishop, there's the Pope in the Catholic Church that is always there. That's not the way it works in the Southern Baptist Convention. The convention really is a convention. That really is the right word. It's a convention, and the convention only exists for 2 days a year. And so what happens is these churches have come together for the purpose of achieving some goals that are really hard to achieve as a single individual church. So we have Southern Baptist entities. It's really more appropriate to talk about Southern Baptist entities than Southern Baptist churches. The churches are just the ones that send messengers to the convention and give money to support these entities. So the entities that you'll hear talked about are the IMB, the International Mission Board. It's about 3,500 right now, missionaries around the world. So cool thing, Tim likes to point this out, best thing and the worst thing about that situation is they're fully funded. Means that when we send a missionary out to the field, they don't have to raise any support. They don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to have funds. They have a very good network, so they have a great network for getting visas. Somebody gets sick, they have got a whole group of people who are very good at coordinating flights and getting people to hospitals and all this. It's a pretty mammoth organization. The thing that's hard about it that you sometimes wonder is where are those missionaries and why don't we see them? Well, because they don't have to travel around and raise support, when they go home, they just go home. And the largest group of Southern Baptist churches, you have any idea where they are? California. In the southeast, right? I mean, we're in the south, but not that south. We're in a different south here in Arizona. And so we have a high concentration in Georgia and Alabama, North Carolina, whatever. That's where a lot of these missionaries go home to. And so we don't see them out here in Arizona that often. Something that we're working on, but that's the International Mission Board. NAM is the North American Mission Board. One of the main things that NAM does is church planting. So you got several thousand church plants at any given time that are being supported through NAM. These two also cooperate and do send relief, and so they help with disaster issues around the globe, and so that's important. Lifeway is an entity, but they're a different one. They're a weird one in the sense that they don't get any money. So they only get money when you buy stuff from them. So no cooperative money actually goes to them. Also, no cooperative money goes to Guidestone. Guidestone is a financial and insurance group. Basically, they were chartered to help churches be able to get insurance for staff and provide retirement plans and stuff like that. So you guys graciously give towards retirement for me and other staff members here at the church, and it goes to Guidestone. One of the cool things about Guidestone that I like about that is that, so if you invest with them, when the churches invest with them, they also tell them you've got to have certain controls on what kinds of companies they're investing in, and so you know that you're not reaping interest on your retirement from the pornography industry or things like that you wouldn't want to be investing in. We also have seminaries. We have 6 seminaries that we support. So you got Southeastern in North Carolina, you got Southern in Kentucky, you've got New Orleans in New Orleans, you got Southwestern in Fort Worth, Texas, you got Midwestern in Kansas City, and you've got now, previously Golden Gate, now Gateway, no longer in San Francisco, now in Los Angeles. So those are the seminaries. And we've got the ERLC, who tries to help Southern Baptists think about all kinds of like hot issues of the day and advocate for biblical values in Washington and beyond. Always issues there that we'll come back to. You've got exciting things like a committee on the order of business, and this is the one I wanted to point to, the executive committee. They're the one that actually exists all year round. And they distribute funds and do the work. Okay, so here's how this happens. 2 days a year, you send messengers, and the messengers do a couple of really important things. They elect a president, and the president appoints, this is the most Baptist thing you'll hear all night, the Committee on Committees. Right? How exciting. The Committee on Committees appoints, nominates and a committee on nominations. The messengers do vote on that, but they're nominated by the Committee on Committees. You got a resolutions committee. We'll look at a couple of resolutions. Registration committee and tellers. They count votes. The biggest business meeting. They say it's the largest deliberative body that meets in the world. So there are 10,000 people, and they can all vote. And they take multiple votes, and you got to write it down on the paper and hand it in, and somebody's got to count it. So anybody who wants to be a teller next year in Dallas, let me know. We'll get you signed up. Okay, so in June, did you want to go? All these places that you never want to go in June, like New Orleans and Dallas and stuff. Indianapolis was not too bad. Okay, and then the Committee on Nominations, though, they nominate trustees for all these entities. So we don't actually directly oversee those entities. The trustees do. And so then you vote on the trustees, and that's how this big organization works. And it's a lot. So that's the whole point of everybody getting together, is basically to hear reports from all these entities, ask questions about what's going on, and then try to put the right people in the right places to ultimately get good leadership over these joint efforts that we're a part of, because the funds, which are administered by the executive committee, are then distributed to these entities so that they can keep doing the work that they do. All right? Does anybody want to ask a question about that? I'm going to just assume that you didn't get it all if you've never thought about it. Does anyone want to ask a question about how that kind of works?
How long do they serve?
Oh, great question. I believe it's 2 years. Yep. And usually, pretty sure all of the positions, the president serves for 1 year, but almost always gets elected to another term. And everybody else, I think, is 2 years, and they can be re-nominated and re-elected for another term, and then you're done. So
who was elected president?
His name is Clint Presley, and he's not somebody that I knew. He's a pastor in North Carolina. Yep. Usually a pastor, usually from the South. Not always, but
David Allen
usually.
was in the running.
He was in the running. There were a lot of people put forward this year, so that was interesting. Usually there's like one or two, maybe three. There were 6 this year, so that meant the tellers did a lot of work, because you've got to have more than a 50% positive vote to be elected. So it took lots of effort.
So he's the senior pastor at Hickory Grove Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, there you go. Does that now?
No.
Didn't do a whole lot for me either. Okay.
I spent last month in North Carolina.
But that didn't help. So again, one of the things it's neat. The Southern Baptist Convention is able to do some really cool things. I think a big misconception that's important for us to be able to correct. The Southern Baptist Convention, it only exists for 2 days a year, and they don't tell churches what to do. So churches are autonomous. So every church does their own thing, but so you go, well, is there any kind of parameters and any kind of accountability? Basically, the accountability works like this. If you want to participate, you start giving to the cooperative program, and you tell them we want to participate. And they'll probably ask you some pretty basic questions. And as long as you say that you closely align with the statement of faith, which that is a very lawyerly kind of term, right? Closely align. What does that exactly mean? Then you can participate, and you can send messengers to the convention. But there are some things that automatically get you. I think it's more fun to say dismembered, but people don't like that term. So you get dismembered for a few things that are written into the Constitution. So if you if you've got somebody in pastoral leadership who has a known record of abuse, you get dismembered. If you actively promote racism, you get dismembered. If you, Bobby, what are some of the, there's like 2 other ones. No, you don't. That's not in the Constitution. I'm getting there.
Okay. I remember the other 2 things.
So racism and abuse, and if you perform homosexual weddings, you automatically get dismembered. Well, you didn't automatically get dismembered. There's a process, but it's in the Constitution. So one of the big conversations at the convention has been on female pastors, right? It keeps sort of cropping its head up. The last 2 years, it's been overwhelmingly voted on whenever it comes up to dismember. I like that term, but really, it's not. Nobody actually gets dismembered. Nobody does anything to these churches, but they are excluded from friendly cooperation with the convention. That's the right way to talk about it. And so you'll remember maybe last year the big thing was Saddleback Church, and they had they were ordaining women to the pastorate and had called a woman to be the preaching pastor was her title. And so there was the process is the credentials committee. Where are they in there?
On the side.
Thank you. Credentials committee over here is made aware of a problem. Somebody who's acting in a way that's not closely aligned with the statement of faith. The statement of faith does clearly state that the office of pastor is to be held by men. And they make an evaluation, and they can choose to separate that communion so that they're not in friendly cooperation anymore. But that church can appeal it and bring it to the whole messenger body at the next meeting, which is what Saddleback and a couple other churches did. They were overwhelmingly voted to uphold the credential committee's decision, and they were dismembered. Same thing this year. Church in Virginia was invited to not send messengers anymore for that reason. The Credentials Committee also removed several churches on account of pastors who had not been handling abuse situations properly, and also for having female senior pastors. There was in the news, if you look for these kinds of things in the news, reports about an effort to put that into the Constitution so that was just clearly stated as an automatic thing. You have a woman of, and then here was where it was controversial, a pastor of any kind. And that was the language that had people concerned. So let me explain a little bit, because I don't think there's actually any confusion or disunity. So they voted on a church from Virginia who had taken a position of putting women in ministry. So of 10,000-ish people, they had over 91% vote to have this church leave. So that's not like, oh, it was a split decision. I mean, that's an overwhelming majority for a body like that. The amendment to the Constitution was not passed because, I think, as you talk to people who voted against it, we have numerous churches who call the person who run like their children's ministry children's pastor or something like that. And we would say, here's what I would say, I don't think you should be using that title for that job, because traditionally what we mean by pastor is the same thing as elder, is the same thing as overseer, which is what our statement of faith says. And the person who runs the children's department is probably not an elder or an overseer. And so there seems to be some desire to give a little bit more time to flesh this out. And I would say I hope that churches who are maybe misusing that title would start using it properly. So that's what I see going on with that. It was still I think it was 61% in favor, but it needed to be 2/3 2 years in a row. And so it was passed last year, and it did not get a 2/3 vote this year. So frankly, it's going to keep coming up until it gets resolved. Any questions about that stuff you want to know about what's going on with that? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily about pastors, but is there anything said about the female deacons and elders? Is that kind of included in that?
So in our statement of faith, we say that there are 2 biblical offices in the church, that of, and then we get pastor / elder / overseer. That's one. All 3 of those titles, one office. And then deacon. And there's no comments about deacons being male or female in our statement of faith. And you'll find Southern Baptist churches with a range of opinions on that. And that actually goes all the way back to the late 1500s. You have Baptists who think that women can be deacons, and you have Baptists who think they can't. So that is not currently, to my knowledge, being discussed at the convention level. Mm-hmm.
Here's a question I have. So, if a church is dismembered, can they still call themselves Southern Baptist or Southern Baptist Church?
So, right. This is I don't think they should. They are not in friendly cooperation with the convention anymore. But because the Southern Baptist isn't a denomination, it's like who decides? It's a little bit tricky, but I would say they should not, because they're not in cooperation with the convention. Now, if they want to continue to give money, I'm sure they'll take it, but they don't get a say. So really, like your connection to the convention is basically measured by your right to have a say in what we do with what is given. And so a church that is no longer in friendly cooperation would have to go through the process again and show that they've remedied whatever the issue was to be in cooperation again, and to then be able to send messengers to the convention. So, for example, Saddleback, I would say, I don't know that there's any police to like tell them you can't call yourself Southern Baptist anymore, but they shouldn't, because they're not in friendly cooperation with the convention. Does that make sense?
Well, I understand that they shouldn't, but so if we were traveling somewhere and went to a church that said they're Southern Baptist,
How would you know? How would you know? So, good question. This is a matter of some current discussion, is who's keeping track of this? Because not every church sends messengers. I mean, right? I just told you there were 10,000 people, and then I said there's about 47,000 churches. So most churches are not sending even one person, and then some churches are sending more. You do get a limit on how many messengers you can send. Little side trail. Every church can send at least 2, and then further messengers are added depending on the size of the church and how much they're giving to the cooperative program. I don't know what the top limit is. I want to say like 12.
For us, it was 10.
It was 10. Okay.
Has the convention trademarked the Southern Baptist Convention?
I have no idea. That's a
If
good.
they have, then they can certainly exclude whoever they want.
Then they can-
That's what they ought to do.
That's a good point, and I don't know. I don't know. Actually, I don't know the answer to that. One of the issues is the way that you would typically find out is you go on the Southern Baptist website, but they're not. So this is something that makes me think maybe we're not doing that. There isn't anybody tasked with actively keeping that list up to date. So you could have a church that gave one time 10 years ago to the cooperative program. They end up on the website, and until they get officially dismembered, they're still on there, but they may not be actively giving anymore. They may not even consider themselves really part of the convention. But just like frankly, a lot of Baptist churches have this problem with our membership. They're not culling, they're not going through and actually saying, oh boy, we haven't heard from you in a decade. Maybe you shouldn't be on the list anymore. So that's a problem that's been identified because a statistic came out that said, hey, as many as 1,800 churches on that list have a female pastor listed on their website. And so then people are going, how did that happen? And then people are going, nobody's even heard from that church in 10 years. We don't even know what's going on. So there's a problem there, and it needs to be addressed. And I know there's several proposals for trying to deal with it. And it'll probably end up being these guys' job, the executive committee, to deal with it, because obviously a 2-day meeting doesn't create a website and maintain a website and things like that. So that's part of the challenge there. Okay. What have you heard? Have you heard anything exciting in the news about the Southern Baptist Convention? Or do you just tune it out?
They said one headline I said they voted to almost accept women pastors.
Right. So you're going to get different spins on this, right? So because the constitutional amendment failed, some people are the spin you're hearing is Southern Baptist Convention now in favor of women pastors, and I would say that is a serious amount of spin on it. When you've got a 91% vote to remove a church for having female pastors, that doesn't sound like we're very supportive of that. What didn't pass was the amendment to the Constitution.
And then the law and
That was
in vitro fertilization.
Yeah, that's the other big one that's in the news.
Yeah.
So if you're not reading this stuff in the news, that's probably just as well. But one of the things that's up here is the Resolutions Committee, and they're the ones that always get in the news. So the Resolutions Committee receives recommendations from anybody. You can send them a proposed resolution if you'd like to, of resolutions that they think the convention should adopt. And basically they're statements on current events and trying to give a perspective that is in line with the scriptures and where Baptist churches fall on any given issue. So you can imagine the contentiousness about this because you're trying to speak to the current issues of the day. Couple things that are really important. The resolutions that do get passed are not binding. So you don't have to agree with them. We don't have to agree with them. The convention isn't forced to abide by them. The entities don't have to abide by them. And the other thing is, once you pass them, you're done. You can't change them. It's just it's a historical artifact. That's all it is. So you can go on southernbaptistsbc.net and you can look up all the resolutions that have been passed, and you'll love some of them and you will hate others. And there are some that they have come back in subsequent years and said, we messed up. That was really bad. So just give you, here's the sad history of the Southern Baptist Convention. The convention was started because there were Baptists throughout the Union. So this is an American group convention of churches. And there was controversy about sending people and involving people who held slaves to the mission field or involving them in missions work. And you had some people saying, absolutely not. You had some people saying this is fine. So this is the 1800s, so pre-Civil War, 1845. And then you have a bunch of people saying, we just want to focus on sending missionaries. We don't want to weigh in on this. Well, that group, basically the group of we don't want to weigh in on this and the people in support of slavery, they founded the Southern Baptist Convention. So you can imagine what some of the early resolutions looked like. It's not good. And it's a thing that the convention has repeatedly since then repented of and said we don't agree with that anymore. But because it's a historical artifact and the convention only exists for 2 days a year, a subsequent convention can't undo the resolution of a previous one because that convention doesn't exist anymore. The convention's a different body every year. So anyways, it's just important to know what you're looking at when you look at these. They had, back in the 90s, resolutions to boycott Disney. Everybody then later was like, that was crazy. And now everybody's like, actually, we got it right. So big pendulum swings on all of that stuff. But one of the ones that showed up in the news this year, and I'm gonna pull it up there so you can see at least part of it, is the one on in vitro fertilization. Okay, so. Aww. Whoa. Okay, so if you go to sbc.net, you can go to resources, resolutions, and you can see them. And here's what the format, what they look like, all right? So they have a bunch of whereas statements, and then they have a bunch of resolve statements. So basically, here's a bunch of facts, and then here's how we think that you should respond to that. So let's just read through some of this, okay? Whereas every human being is made in the image of God, scripture citation, Genesis chapter 1, verses 27 to 28, and is thus respected and protected from the moment of fertilization until natural death without regard to development of stage or location. That's language very similar to our statement of faith. Whereas human beings possess an inherent right to life and an opportunity to reach their full developmental maturity. So citations from the Old Testament law and consequences for the men fighting and causing a child to be born prematurely, and there being consequences for that. Whereas governments are ordained by God to safeguard human dignity and promote flourishing at all stages. So say, hey, government, you got a job to do. And part of your job is to protect human flourishing. Whereas biblical creation order portrays the embodied union of a husband and wife as the singular normative expression for procreation. Infertility is a reality, right, that people are dealing with. Couples who experience the searing pain of infertility can turn to God, look to Scripture for numerous examples of infertility. So we recognize the Scripture does address these kinds of things. Children are a gift of God regardless of their circumstances, right? So Psalm 127:3. Children should be fully respected and protected. Not all technological means of assisting human reproduction are equally God-honoring or morally justified. So let's say that there are issues with the way that we sometimes try to help people who are struggling with infertility. Southern Baptists have, this is our historic stance, and then here's really the crux of the issue as it relates to in vitro. The in vitro fertilization process routinely generates more embryos then can be safely implanted, thus resulting in the continued freezing, stockpiling, and ultimate destruction of human embryos, some of whom may also be subjected to medical experimentations. So that's the problem they're trying to address. In vitro fertilization most often participates in the destruction of embryonic human life and increasingly engages in the dehumanizing methods for determining suitability for life and genetic sorting based on notions of genetic fitness and parental preferences. So here's the issue, right? If you are going to pursue in sort of a standard in vitro fertilization attempt, you need to go to the doctor, and they need to put a woman on medication so that she can so that they can extract eggs from her body, and then they're going to take eggs and sperm and they're going to put them together and they're going to create embryos, and they're going to let them grow for a couple of days. At which point they are going to select the ones that are most likely to be healthy, or they might run genetic tests. Do you want a boy? Do you want a girl? Do you want brown hair? Whatever. You're going to make these choices, and then you're only going to implant so many of them. And the typical process that they're pushing against, that they're concerned about, is the tendency to say, look, some of these are just going to be discarded. They're never going to be implanted in the womb. And in fact, because it's a very expensive process, we're going to make as many of these as we can. So you may end up with 20 embryos and only want 2 kids. And what do you do with the other 18 if the first 2 rounds are successful? But from the other perspective, the side of why would you make so many is just because you go, well, odds are about 30 to 40%, depending on age and all these different factors. So, we want to go ahead and make more than what you're going to need, and then if you don't need them, what do? Well, for Christians who believe that life begins at conception, this is a major moral problem, right? Because we're now creating life, starting life, and then we're freezing life. Then we're not sure what we're going to do with it. Should we discard them? Do we just perpetually freeze children? And that's a major problem. So typically what you hear from a Southern Baptist ethicist, they would say, be very careful with in vitro fertilization. If you're going to do this, don't create more embryos than you are committed to giving a chance at life. And so, I'll just tell you what I would counsel a couple. I would say, look, if you're gonna do this, it doesn't matter that it's more expensive. You need to be committed to every single one of those embryos, and you need to give them every chance at coming to, just coming into full growth and development. And even if you need to find a doctor who will work with those commitments. And if they won't work with you on those commitments, then you should not, I would say you should not do this. So that's where this is going, because look at this. Whereas estimates suggest that between 1 million and 1.5 million human beings are currently stored in cryogenic freezers in an embryonic state throughout the United States, with most unquestionably destined for eventual destruction now, therefore, and then we get the results. So that's the big problem, right? This isn't just a theoretical, this could happen. This is a reality. If you got between 1 and 1.5 million, what we would say life from conception, so rightly call these children, in freezers. That's a big moral problem. Yeah.
One other issue too is if the couple divorces and they fight over what's to be done with those.
Right, and because legally they're not recognized as persons, although there's some current legal battles about this, right? Think in Alabama, it's property. So these are property, and their litigation happens under property law. And what do you do when one person says, "Never mind, I want to discard these"? The other person says, "No, I don't." But there's all kinds of issues that come along with this. So they're saying these are the kinds of things that we want to be resolved to do. The messengers of the Southern Baptist Convention meeting in Indianapolis, they usually always state it's this group of people because it's a historical artifact. Call on Southern Baptists to reaffirm the unconditional value and right to life of every human being, including those in embryonic stage, to utilize only reproductive technologies consistent with the affirmation, especially in the number of embryos generated in the IVF process. Further, we affirm children, no matter the circumstances of their conception, are gifts from God and loved by Him. So calling on Southern Baptists to act accordingly with this. But this is the big, I'm not going to read everything. You guys can go on there and you can read it. But this is one of the big ones that's been in the news. Depending on what news source you have, there's going to be different spins on this, whether this is, opposed to any and all reproductive technology. If Southern Baptists had their way, then we wouldn't be doing anything to help couples that struggle with infertility or whatever. And so I just encourage you, if you're interested in these things and you read about them, just hop on the website and actually read through the document. They're usually much more nuanced than what you're going to get in the news story. Anybody want to comment on that or ask a question about it? Because it's been one of the big takeaways that's been in the news.
Anybody remember, she's in California, at Octomom, she had 8.
Oh, okay. Wow.
No,
That's a lot. That's right. And so they,
babies, and they was all in the hospital, they was all too small, and some of the people in California was upset because they felt like, who's gonna put the needle?
oh, yeah.
Cause she already had 6 children, she wasn't married, and then she went to the doctor and,
Yep. And they said, sure, we'll implant
Yeah.
8 embryos, or maybe they did less. And then they, sometimes they're usually implanted before like twins would divide. So sometimes you end up with a lot of kids. There's all kinds of moral challenges. And the other factor is these kids are frozen for sometimes 20 plus years. But then there are some people who will choose to give these for adoption. And people can then have a baby that was created frozen 20 years ago. I mean, so here's the active issue is there's 1.5 quite possibly viable embryos who, given the opportunity at life, could live. So it's all kinds of moral, things on transgender stuff. So I learned what the word transgender meant when I was in college from one of these resolutions. I'd never heard it. And somebody brought it up and was like, hey, Baptists, you all need to be thinking about this because there are biblical ramifications. So there can be helpful things that come from it, but it's not a binding thing. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? I guess that did take our whole time. Yeah, Terry?
So it's like a corporate diary.
Yeah, there you go. That's an interesting way to put it. Sure. And we all get to argue about it before we put it in officially. Yep. Yes.